Okay, we are live, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very grateful to be here. Today we're going to be looking at apparently 15,000 new cases of COVID-19, what we were previously calling the coronavirus, has broken out. So one of the interesting things here is that it actually comes much closer into line with the quadratic math equation that we had been taking a look at in our previous video. So with that in mind, basically what we're going to do is we're going to dive right in, and I'm going to leave you guys with a few opening sentiments, is that I want to make sure I'm very clear about a few of these facts. So let's dive right in and take a look. Okay, so here we are on the Johns Hopkins University aggregated website, and this massive jump that we see here from being reported of 44,000 cases on the 2nd of February, on the 12th of February, today where we are on the 13th at 59.8 thousand in mainland China, is a noticeable and stark difference to the contrasting 40,000 we were just watching. Now again, here when we look at Wu Flu Live, which has now changed its name to COVID-19 info.live, for those of you that are interested, again, they have changed the name. So first off, let me start by saying this. These numbers are real people. There are real families involved. I am in no way, shape, or form a medical professional. What I'm trying to do here is understand these things myself, and by going through them and repeating the data that I've found and really reiterating the things that I've learned. What is the R0 value? What are case fatality rates and complications? How do you find these things out? This is what I like about these situations, again, barring the fact that we know there are real lives involved here and that this is considered a deadly contagion, is that it gives us the opportunity to learn something about pathology and epidemiology that we hadn't before. So I like to take these instances in life, and instead of make it out to be something to be panicked and worried about, it's something and to become better educated on. So for instance, I learned last night that if you get less than 7 to 9 hours of sleep on average, your T cell count starts to go down, and your T cells are one of the ways that your body fights off these viruses. And often the people that seem to show little symptoms, their T cell, their fighting cells, seem to do a much better job when that sleep is there. And it has very little to do with nothing else. That's just sleep. You start to go into the ideas of, well, what about vitamin C, B6, all the regular things that you need to take to stay healthy that your body doesn't create? Then what are your chances of being able to fight off viruses? One of the key points that we've seen from all the medical literature, like when you dive into the New England Journal of Medicine and start to take a look at these briefings on how people had died, the first case of, not died, but the progression of getting sick, we start to see what they get here. What they're calling pneumonia is likely a cytokine storm. Cliff High's put some data out on this. Peak Prosperity has put data out on this. Dr. John Campbell has also talked about this in some of his older videos. And the cytokine storms are actually fairly common in new cases of flu. So here you go from Science Daily. What is a cytokine storm? The cytokine storm seems to be how the younger people are being affected. For instance, with Dr. Li Wenliang, I apologize if there's me mispronouncing this. I have been practicing my Chinese, though, a little bit. Shay. Thank you, everyone. That's the only Chinese little bit I know. But anyways, what I wanted to get to here is the younger people seem to be dying from a complication that's known as a cytokine storm. And it's when these T cells go around and they start attacking, like your immune system, basically, these T cells start to go around and attack the virus. They drop out a bunch of cytokines. I couldn't name all of them. There's a bunch of different variations. But what that ends up happening, it almost floods your system. And you can end up dying from what looks like an onset of pneumonia because your T cells are actually flooding your lungs with this fluid. I think it's an anti-inflammatory. There's a few other things that they have inside of the cytokines that are generally positive for this process. So there are ways to quell this this. Now, one of them is by getting enough sleep. And that's something that really kind of baffles me, because the WHO is not coming out and giving any useful information just in general. Like the fact that you getting over 7 to 8 hours of sleep increases T cell production by a noticeable amount is a huge additive to anyone's arsenal when they're trying to remain healthy. And I think what we're seeing now is this political song and dance. And that's what I think has been really represented by us being worried about mainland China's information aggregate right off the get-go, right? We could have safely assumed that they were not telling us everything, because when we looked, what we saw was to a 90 case. So for those of you that don't know, I apologize for how vast this topic is, but again, there's a lot of new data to learn very quickly, but this is known as a perfect quadratic, right? So in the first early days in the growth of the cycle of the virus numbers, like how many confirmed cases there were, we saw a perfect quadratic, which basically meant the numbers that they were giving us were within 99th of a percentile, the exact mathematical quadratic. And this is what it does, is it lets us know that they were lying to us right out the gate. And the fact that these other countries didn't know or recognize this is kind of worrisome. This is a very noticeable mathematical equation. It's like it'd be akin to me being like, hey, look at my hot girlfriend. Here's a photo of her, and it still has the Shutterstock like watermark across the photo, and you're like, dude, this is a Shutterstock photo. You're like, oh no, she's a Shutterstock model. Yeah, that's what it is. Let me find some other photos. And that's what this math equation is. It is basically a Shutterstock photo of what you would see in an exponential growth curve. So if we compare the Shutterstock photo of the quadratic math, where we started to veer off right here, this is on around the 8th of February, I can compare it back. We started to see a drop off on the numbers, and we would argue that the drop off in the numbers here, which again started around the 7th, yeah, there's the 8th. This is when they first started to say the numbers going down. We have this contained. Everybody should go back to work in China. We saw the around the 11th, that's when they started saying this, hey, Monday, like, we can go back to work now. We can keep everything moving, to see a spike that comes out that's 15,150 new cases on mainland China for that day. That's not including the 47 infections from the other parts of the world. That the data that we had been getting, we knew was fudge. But what does happen is we see now that we go back to our quadratic math equation on the 12th here of February, we're much closer. The 12th of February, it says we should be at 65,000, right? So we've actually gone right back to this quadratic growth curve with this new inclusion of confirmed cases, give or take a few thousand. And then again, this is within a fairly high degree of accuracy that this is a stock quadratic equation, meaning it's going to show us a type of exponential growth. And we've seen that since the beginning. The relationship of this to SARS in terms of the growth and the spread, which comes down to the R naught. If I've got it and 4 people get it from every time I get it, that's 4 and 4 people. So what you can end up doing is you can go back. The first cases we have confirmed from Dr. Li Wenliang was around December 8th. So let's imagine that from December 8th, I think to now, December 8th, you just go out 5 days, which is what we would assume the average lag time is for noticing people get sick, and you start to use your R naught value. So, it's we're probably at around 15 or like 10 to 12 evolutions of this since December. So we can assume that we should be actually significantly higher, that we should probably be somewhere around the 150 to the 250,000 confirmed cases mark already. Again, we do know that there's asymptomatic transmission, which means someone can go around with the virus, not know they have it, not even really get sick necessarily. There's a lot of big unknown questions, and the general media is taking a very lackadaisical approach in educating others about this type of information. Like the amount of stuff I've learned about epidemiology and pathology in the last 10 days is absolutely amazing to me. It's more than that, I guess, more than 10 days now. It's like 20, going to be almost 20 days here from January 20th to the 22 days almost. But the important part that they're leaving out is that this information is going to be valuable to almost everyone, because even though it's only a few days of study, it's fairly easily to assimilate what's going on here. Now, if they're asymptomatic transmission, that means the death rate is lower. What we can safely assume now is that this is going to be a global pandemic, that almost everybody on the globe could very likely get this disease. So being proactive and prepared now, I think, is the next best step to take. So the WHO not releasing data like, hey, everyone, make sure you're getting at least 8 hours of sleep to help increase T cell production, instead of, oh, we changed the name. And this is the biggest news is aside from when the numbers had jumped the other day, was that they had changed the name to COVID-19 as to not be racist. And let me go back to this again, because this is and I apologize, I jump around all over the place. You kind of fill in the gaps as we go. So you got to listen for a long time, otherwise the story isn't as apparently clear. But first off, I had the pleasure of meeting a bunch of Chinese people this year, and they're absolutely amazing people. Very respectful, very sympathetic, very kind, and very intelligent people. What we're not trusting is the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, to give us the real data. But there is, I think, a problem, and it's human nature too. So I also want to suggest that, us being afraid of one another and potentially having to go into a self-quarantine state as a globe might become a potential. I think people would do that on average anyways. You as this grows, if we see a heightened death rate, again, remembering 2 to 3% of the world's population, with the current death rate is something like 240 million people dead at the end of every year. On average, only 60 million people die every year. So we're looking at a 3 to 4 times increase on the average death rate if this thing becomes a constant in our species, right? We do know that we've had the flu for a long time, and we just keep growing and adapting, and it keeps adapting and growing with us. We have this virus for life now, and that's what we don't know about the escape potential of something like this, where once it becomes a part of our global immunoresponse system, what happens next? We don't really know. There are all kinds of weird side effects. You could actually get the virus, and then after you get it and you heal, you could become more susceptible from dying from it next time. We just don't know. Futurism put out an article a few days ago about can get coronavirus twice. I forget, I should have opened this before. Yes, scientists warn you can catch coronavirus more than once. And we knew this from the other coronaviruses. You can get the flu more than once. So an idea behind, okay, well, once you build up the immune system antigens for this, can you get it again? And if you get it again, does it become more deadly? Because sometimes that's the case. We know that's the case with malaria. We know the more times and malaria is not a coronavirus, just to so I'm clear here. But the more times you get dengue or malaria, the more likely your body's going to actually go into breakdown mode on the second or the, I guess, what we'll call the tertiary moments of impact between your virus or the virus and your immune system. So it says here, the underlying idea behind vaccination, or what they used to call chickenpox parties back in the day, is that exposure to a virus will trigger the immune system to generate the antibodies that will shield the person from the virus in the future. But according to Chinese health officials, the antibodies created after what they're calling now COVID-19 infections are not always strong enough to keep patients from getting sick again. For those patients who have been cured, there's also likelihood of a relapse, Shan Wengyang says, the director of pneumonia prevention and treatment at the China-Japanese Friendship Hospital, during the Friday press conference. And again, this is back last week. He says even though the antibody will be generated, individuals' antibodies maybe won't last as long. Again, raising the question of what happens now that we're looking at this becoming a constant part of our human dialogue. This is really important, I think, to be studying these things and informing people, and the WHO has done none of that. They've been more concerned with renaming the damn thing than getting any valuable information out to anyone. It's such political tail wag dog theater that it's almost disgusting. I mean, let's use the Japanese cruise ship. There's currently a Japanese cruise ship that had like 1 or 2 infected people on the cruise ship, and then from there they decided to quarantine everyone on the cruise ship. Well, we already know from a very scientific state of relationship that boats are like the worst place to quarantine people, because those are where we've seen viral pathological outbreaks many times in the past, because you just have such close living quarters, very cheap sewage systems in comparison with what you have on like well-built places like my home here. I've got my own biodigester. It's like it deals with everything inside of like a closed tank system, can actually use the for gas, but boats don't have this. This is one of the worst places to quarantine people, and we know that. Like, we as a scientific community can know that. Yet, what do? They quarantine everyone at boat because there's just so much panic, and nobody is giving out useful information. You know, the idea that coronavirus could, is it transferred through an aerosol, or can you get it through the mucous membrane of your eyes? This was all information we had back from other coronaviruses. We knew that generally they were aerosols. We knew that you could get that through the mucous membranes of your eyes. So why did we not just take proactionary methods and measures and say, hey, this is how this works. Let's not wait till there's data to know that we're right. Let's assume that this is similar to everything fucking else in the past. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And this comparison with the flu, it is nothing like the flu. So, you know, I don't know if I have some of these open, but if we compare the statistics to the flu, I think it's this one on average. Yeah, this is from Business Insider. What we can compare, and this is from, see, this was the stupid thing. They never should have called it the Wuhan flu. Again, the downside here is even though that's where it came from, it's not racist, but it definitely creates geopolitical tensions. And you know, from there we could spiral down a rabbit hole. Is this maybe intended to do so? You know, there's a question of whether around this is a biological weapon. Even if it's not created by mankind, it's a biological weapon that has been created through generations of animals getting sick, right? So even if it's not directly aimed at people, I think the real question is well, let's be kinder to the Chinese people. They're extremely nice, respectful individuals. You know, so why was there a political stab attached here by the CDC, World Health Organization, etc.? They should have just called it right off the bat COVID something, right? And it was nCoV, but this whole Wuhan flu in the news definitely created some political tension between all these countries, and this is why I think they changed the name. Unimportant, but I just wanted to rant on that though because it was there. This is back when there was 8,000 cases. The fatality rate was 2%. So let's imagine now we have a pandemic that breaks out into the world. Right now in the world we have around 7.8 billion people, so roughly 7.8 billion people. And I'm gonna please correct me if I'm wrong on this because I'm wrong on lots of things. And again, just another recommendation here. I am not a healthcare, mathematics, statistics professional in any way, shape, or form. I could be making tons of mistakes, but I, as the average individual, am trying to figure out what is going on and what I can expect to learn from these situations that will be valuable for me to learn from what is going on. So the fatality rate is around 2%, 7.8 billion people is like something like 160, so maybe 160 billion or 160 million people would die. It's like, okay, well, that's not a whole lot of people. We got 7.8 billion people, but then you look and the average global death toll is only 50 to 70 million people, right? So now you have an epidemic, a pandemic that could wipe out 3 to 4 times the average annual death rate and it could just keep coming back. It could mutate. There are a lot of where there's a lot of known unknowns. Like, could it mutate? We know that coronaviruses, RNA viruses, can mutate just from simple studies. So what's bothered me is that WHO not giving out any information that's valuable in any way, shape, or form is very disturbing. The mainstream media comparing it to the flu is an ignorant sentiment. At a fatality rate of 2% versus the 0.1% of the average flu, it's just absurd. Like, we have more data about this. Let's see here. This is actually, I grabbed this from Peak Prosperity. Is a little chart he made up. But again, you know, we're the COVID, whether it was 2% or 3% versus the 0.1% of the flu is crazy. Not to mention, the flu has less than 1% serious complication rates. Currently, we're sitting somewhere between 10 and 20% on all the cases that we have recorded from, again, highly peer-reviewed papers like the Lancet, the New England Journal, and now the Journal of American Medical Association, with the JAMA Network, all confirming these numbers. Again, the nCoV rate actually that the JAMA and the Lancet have is a little lower. It's around 2.5, not 4.8. But with what we see on the cruise ship, it's highly infectious. We just don't necessarily know because we could be getting a lot of asymptomatic carriers of transmission. Somewhere between the realms of 10 to 30% of people may not show any signs or any worrying symptoms that they would go to the doctor for, and it might appear less than the average flu for them. So we can safely assume that this is going going to become a global pandemic at this point. So answering questions like, well, what do you do as a younger person to fight off a cytokine storm? Sleep more. You're like, oh, well, shit. How come we're not getting any of that? And that's what you'd expect from the WHO, the CDC, and there's just nothing there. Anyways, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go over some of the things that we had found. I wanted to make my sentiments clear that, back here when we made our videos, when I was watching in the early days of January 20th, it was still a large question of, does this become a pandemic? With numbers like this, it seems almost inevitable that this is going to become a global something that we're going to have to deal with as a species. So I think being prepared and being well informed is important. The WHO talking about an infodemic seems just like nonsense. They highlight videos that have no useful information in them. The ABC, CBC, NBC, nothing useful out of there except for numbers about how many people they think might have died. Stock market is in the green. Makes no sense. So I think the important part here that we can take from this is, let's assume now safely that the rest of the world's going to have to deal with this virus. And Singapore was actually the first country to make this sentiment. And I think it's highly commendable of them to say, hey, look, this is going to get out of hand. It's going to get out of hand quickly. So instead of let's try to contain everyone, maybe we just let the virus run loose. And as long as the death rate stays kind of similar to the flu, 1 to 2%, which again is still 30 times higher than the average flu, but it's manageable. We can manage that as a society on a year-over-year basis for the next 100 years or something, right? We can deal with a 1 to 2% loss, right? For 50 years, that's essentially take out all the population. But the population keeps growing. You maybe generally find there's a herd immunity in a particular group of people. Who knows? There's still a lot of unknowns, and that's I think why people are scared. So instead of being scared, do your homework, do your research, figure out what's going on here. Try to, I think, make the leap that we're going to have to deal with this virus as a species from now on. The numbers have just gone too far. Again, you can look at that with an the R naught of even 2.5, which is on the low, very conservative end for the Lancet journals. Let's say we've got 60,000 infected cases right now. How R naught works is like this. So we've got 60,349 cases, and with an R naught of 2.08, for every person that has it, 2.08 people get it. So over the next 5 days, 2.08 people will get this virus. So you have to times 60,349 times. Well, I don't know what I did there. I don't know how to use a calculator, guys. It's probably easier to do in my head. Somewhere like 120,000 people. I could just 120,680, 90, 107 something, 724. Who knows? I'm just gonna guess. So around 120,000 people within the next 5 days, right? And then 5 days after that, it would be 120,000, right? 120,000 times 2.08 again. And that's the difficulty with R naught. Within the next 10 days, you could see 249,000 people. So we go, again, understanding that this is global now, I think is important, because we do know that cytokine storms. So I'm going to read this one to end it off as well. I think this is important information. A cytokine storm is an overproduction of immune cells and their activating compounds known as cytokines, which in a flu infection is often associated with a surge of activated immune cells into the lungs. The resulting lung inflammation, fluid buildup can lead to respiratory distress and can be contained by a secondary bacterial pneumonia, which often will kill you, will be one of the things that kills you, is actually the secondary bacterial infection, often enhancing the mortality rate in patients. This is a little understood phenomenon that occurs in at least several types of infections of autoimmune conditions, but it appears to be particularly relevant in outbreaks of new flu variants. Right there. Again, none of this information is coming from the CDC. Why they don't talk about this is beyond me. It makes no sense. So the cytokine storm is now seen as a likely major cause of mortality in the 1918 to 1920 Spanish flu, which killed more than 50 million people worldwide. And even with the H1N1 flu, swine flu, H5N1 bird flu of recent years, in these epidemics, the patients were most likely to die were relatively young adults with apparently strong immune reactions to the infection, whereas ordinary seasonal flu epidemics disproportionately affect the very young and elderly. So these new epidemics seem to affect the healthy and strong, almost equally that of the young and elderly. And this is something that we should all pay attention to. because there are ways that you can fight against this, and again, sleep is one of those. So again, do your homework, try to figure out what some of these things are, or not. I mean, you can be happy that the mainstream media is giving you the information that you think it will cover all of your bases. But at this point, I think Singapore is the only country that's done that. And to not quote them exactly, but basically they said, look, it's futile potentially to stop this. We need to prepare for that potential futility. So instead of, if you get sick and have the slightest ideas of that, oh, I've got a little bit of a flu, I should go to the doctor because maybe it's coronavirus, which will overwhelm the healthcare systems, is okay, we'll only go to the healthcare system if it becomes severe. And maybe that way we don't overwhelm all of our healthcare systems. Again, the 20% complication rate here is not looking good. And we can probably safely assume that this is going to become a global pandemic now, and there's not a whole lot that we can do to try to contain it over the next few months. Although, you know what, by April we'll know for sure. By April we will have what I consider a peak growth in that exponential curve that we were watching here, and this quadratic equation, which even from where they're giving us data to now, puts us into the millions and millions of people, and that likely means it's gone well beyond the realms of containment. So just so people know, the only way you can get it to containment level is if you bring the R naught down to less than 1. The flu is like 1.28, and it's been around for hundreds of years. It's pretty safe to assume that we have a global pandemic now. And the CDC is saying nothing about this. Only Singapore. Again, hats off to Singapore for being the most well-rounded society out there to say, hey guys, this is probably a global pandemic. It's going to kill a lot of people, but we don't want to overwhelm our healthcare. And hats off to all the healthcare professionals who put their lives in the line to be able to study and help others who have this virus. It's very commendable. I think often we forget that, these are real people that are involved. We are involved in this now global pandemic. So I just wanted to keep everyone updated. I'm going to do this last little bit. It takes any of your thoughts and questions. We'll rant and riff. Again, I was going to produce a bit more let's say, stamped videos, like where I took more time to put them together, but I like going live. I just like riffing. I like freestyling. I like improvising. It reminds me more of like a podcast feeling. I'm not giving you guys just pre-rehearsed data. I haven't written any of this down. I'm just riffing on what I've learned. And for me, that's beneficial because I'm learning. So as I share these things, I get to learn more about what it is I'm talking about. Because the other day I had the R naught wrong. I tried to add the numbers together, right? And it's orders of magnitude, so which means it times it by itself. You could look at it as an exponential growth curve, it's what's called a quadratic. So learning all these weird things about math and pathology and epidemiology and cytokines and the immune systems and T cells, I actually really like that. So sharing it for me is also valuable because I think it's valuable information, especially leading up to the cause and effect that we found now, which this is very, very likely going to be a global pandemic. I wish I could find that Singapore health quote. It was a great one, but I think that they're the only ones that have been really level-headed about this, was saying, okay, it seems like we're going to have to deal with this now. So I'm going to dive in, take a look at your guys' thoughts and questions. Nice. Okay, so sorry for not having looked at all your guys' questions. I'm just going through it now. Again, this is why I kind of like to do the live stream variation more so than just pre-recorded stuff. The mainstream media it does such a bad job, and if we're going to do a better job, we have to make it kind of fun and exciting. And I think the improvisational aspect of any form of communication really makes this stuff a little bit more exciting. And not that I'm trying to make people like a potential pandemic exciting, but it's true. This is it's always exciting to be alive. There's whether it's good or bad. The best approach is to be like, wow, this is fascinating. What is that? Whatever the hell is going on right now is fascinating. I'm bewildered. And over the years, I've been learning more and more to try to take that as my sentiment, so that I don't get scared, and I don't panic and I don't freak out. It's just, hey, cool. This is a great opportunity to learn about something. I think as well. Let's see. 10 weeks ago, Wuhan had 50 cases. Today, Singapore and Hong Kong have 50 cases apiece. It is now becoming apparent that it's a bioweapon. So I want to argue against this bioweapon idea, although I do think there is enough anecdotal evidence to sound the idea that that is a concern. Even if it's not, though, it doesn't make a difference. Wet markets, the world itself is a biological warfare weapons lab, right? The universe is doing everything it can to create those things. Take a look at toxoplasmosis, for instance. What a crazy biological parasite. Like, the intensity that these parasites have figured out how to attack particular types of mammalian, electrical, nervous, neurological systems is absolutely astounding. We don't need to have created it as individuals. So to go off down that level is just a political fucking gauntlet that I don't think is worth it. It's probably safer to assume that the universe is itself doing those things. So let's ignore the political landscape of, oh, maybe someone did this as an attack on China. Maybe it was a bio weapon that was released in Wuhan, which is a possibility. And let's remove that because it is unimportant to the rest of the things that we need to focus on, which is, how do you survive? What do you do if you're young and you're prone to cytokine storms because your immune system is fucking drama queen, right? As we've seen with all these other flus and consistent, very, very consistent. And what can we do as a society? You know, not panicking and not freaking out. I guess kind of letting the pandemic run its course is our only next obvious choice. So regardless of if it's a bioweapon or not, it makes no difference. The only difference I could see that would make is a political one. And if we get into the political conversation of if this a bioweapon, it's like, well, who attacked who? Did China accidentally do it itself? And even still, it's just finger pointing for political ideologies. I don't think it's relevant in the conversation. At this point, it's a global. It looks like it's going to be a global pandemic. So whether or not it's a bioweapon is totally irrelevant. This is going to affect everybody. Now, if maybe in the future we figure out that the ACE receptors, like the it's a polymerase of some kind, but it's basically how the virus connects to the cells. Maybe the Asian genome has more of those, and maybe the Asian population is more likely to have a higher raised death toll. Like everything that we're getting from outside of China in terms of data, it shows a much lower death rate. And again, we don't know, but this is the type of information we're going to find out. And regardless if it's a bioweapon, these are the things that we're going to find out. This may have actually been the case for multiple viruses, and often to date, we see evidence that there are specific genetic genomes that are immune to certain things. There are people in Africa that have become immune to malaria over the generations of their genetic DNA. We see this with the Ashkenazi Jews as well. There's a bunch of times where disease in its genetic makeup will kill a certain percent of the population, and then from there it will adapt, and you'll actually end up becoming immune. Maybe there's people that get very little to no symptoms to this as well. So it's a very interesting topic of conversation. It's like, okay, well, is it a bioweapon or not? We'll never know, but at that point it's irrelevant. With these numbers, I feel very confident this is going to infect the globe maybe for years to come. I feel sadly confident in that. Silver Daddy Silver says, hey, Tio, what is your economic expectations? Any clue as to when the stock market goes negative, Viagra? Great question. Let's take a look at some of the charts here, too. This has been a fascinating point of discussion as well, is to notice that, okay, here we go. You see the S&P 500 has barely been affected since any of this. You do see back, you could call it, what was it, January 20th, this dip here. You could say it was associated, but it's likely not. What I would focus in is this relationship of continual growth over the last few years. This is probably coming mostly from money printing. The only reason our markets are up right now is because of money printing. This is totally an illusionary world. Any of the numbers we're getting from the stock market are probably bullshit. So they could likely just keep it going, even throughout a pandemic. Again, remember, at 2% of the population, that's only 240 million people every year-ish, right? Something like this. Wait, 7 times 2.8. It's like, yeah, let's just say 140 million as an easy one. 2 times 7, right? 140 million. So at 140 million people, that's, again, twice that of the average death rate of our annual of our annual death toll. But what effect that would have on the market would maybe only be temporary. If we're going to see these, it depends what governments do. If governments all of a sudden go into haywire panic lockdown mode, and they can't keep places open because everyone's panicking, yeah, you could see a big dip in the markets eventually. The supply chain could be massively affected. 80% of the world's antibiotics come directly from China. I think the important part here is to understand that, yes, it's going to have a toll on human life, which is disastrous, and our hearts go to anyone that is affected by any type of dire situation for their family. Tragedy is always painful. But secondarily, what I'm worried about on an exponential level is, does this start a chain reaction in the economic supply chain where, okay, now we can't get parts for our delivery vehicles over the next few months, or now you just start to run out of things, and you start to see a big kink in the market as we're used to it, and a potential collapse, which would be probably more catastrophic in terms of death toll than the virus itself, if that's at 2%. We know there is the potential that maybe it's way higher than that. I've watched videos of people talking to Wuhan crematory officials who said that they're burning hundreds of bodies a day. And if we look at, maybe the death toll is way higher. Maybe we go into total lockdown and quarantine. It's not just the quarantine. It is going to be the economic breakdown that would be one of the scarier things to be a part of, because that would mean food, regular amenities wouldn't be delivered all over the world. So this could have a compounding effect that exacerbated everything that was taking place here. So I haven't taken that off the board yet, but if it stays at 2 to 3%, which is what we're getting from some of the other countries outside of China, everyone gets infected anyways, then it's not as big of a deal as, say, like a 20 to 30% would just goodbye everything, right? At 2 to 3%, they can kind of ignore it. You can kind of ignore it at that point, unless your hospitals get overwhelmed by other patients, and you end up having a whole other breakdown in the hospital systems itself. So that's a different question. At this point, it's really hard to say. I think it depends wholly on the supply chain. So we have So C3 here says the same thing. Yeah, we have 90% of the antibiotics that are imported into the U.S. are made in China. I believe Politico says it's 80%. And most of those have closed down their factories. The knock-on effects could well be higher than the viral casualty rate. Yeah, I agree here too, because what you would end up with is a very overwhelmed hospital system of people that would have a regular containable bacterial infection, and then end up dying from something totally random, like a cut on their finger because there's just no penicillin, or like a tooth infection because we've ran out of amoxicillin or something. You know what I mean? The knock-on and ripple effects here could be disastrous. It really depends on what China does. Does everyone go back to work? And do they just give up on the futility and say, well, I guess a bunch of people are going to die? Or are the complication rates still too high? Like 20 to 30% of the people all of a sudden in the ICU in the world over the next 9 to 12 months is disastrous. That is, you could pretty much count them dead to some degree or another, because they would get very little to no help. So you could turn what is normally a 2% death rate into a significantly higher death rate, because the comparable rates of ending up in the ICU unit maybe being survivable with a bunch of intensive care, and that intensive care is not there, those people might just die. And that would again push us into the tenths or 20s or 10, at least double-digit percents of a death rate here if our hospital systems are not equipped to deal with it. So I think it's a great question. I don't want to lean too far in the future on that one. So far, let's stick with the 2% death rate, and let's stick with the 2 or not. That's still itself like something we have not seen before unleashed on the planet. So great question there. Great sentiment. C3 says imports are missing. So C3 lives somewhere in China as well. So he's giving us some data here. It says, our building has a caseworker who approves our travel outside of the development building. We're allowed to leave 3 times a week to get groceries. Most of the vegetables travel a very short distance, fortunately. That's good. Glad to hear that things are still going. C3, that's nice. Let's see, just the last few more of your guys' questions here, and then I'll dive offline. Let's make sure. I think everything's still running. I have no idea. It's impossible for me to tell. I think it's all working still. Let's assume that it is. 6,260 people recovered. Does that mean the cure is on the way? No. So those are people that have just recovered naturally. And again, we don't know if they can be reinfected. It's very possible they could be reinfected and that they don't have the proper antibodies yet. We don't know. We don't have enough statistical data on those. When it's all over, the mortality rate is recovered over dead, so we could be smart to compare it now. So 15% give or take on mortality. Yeah, I think it's good to be forward looking and follow those statistics and just not be panicked. Do you think containment measures used in China will come to the USA or Canada? That's a great question. That is a very, very good question. It is one of the very few things that where they could quarantine people on what would appear as like pretty draconian measures without people necessarily arguing. So I would say yes. They would have to jump through a lot more hurdles. Congress and Senate would have to pass something. But it's possible. I think they already quarantine people and don't let them leave. What if the system got overwhelmed? It's hard to say. We really don't know yet what this looks like on a first world country. I had hopes that the Japanese cruise ship was going to be our first good sentiment analysis, and then we remembered, oh yeah, everything pathological on a boat is like exponentially stronger. So now where you would hope like 1 or 2 people would maybe get 8 to 12 people sick at most, you have hundreds and hundreds of people on that Japanese cruise ship which are infected, and potentially more that are infected on the way just from being stuck in those close quarantine areas. So the hopes of any pure like R0 and death and transmissibility data went right out the wing. So now we're waiting. Okay, well, and Singapore, being the smart ones here, have already said, well, I guess we just might look at the futility of trying to quarantine this and hope that we don't have overwhelmed Medicare systems. Don't go to the doctor if you don't feel abnormally sick just because you have the flu. Buck up with deal with it. Go to the doctor if you're dying. So let's see. War and containment exercises have already begun. I try not to lean into the conspiracy world too much. I definitely go down that road because I think it's important to have an open mind to all the possibilities. But generally, I try to stay, at least on the day-to-day basis, focused on the statistical data that we do have. Look, we could be at 1 million cases already in China. We don't know. I mean, if you look back December 8th and you use an R0 of 4, yeah, we're well over 1 million people already. And that could be a very real situation. We don't know yet, but we're going to find out. Places like Singapore, they're going to give us real data. They've got a fantastic healthcare system. Some of the smartest individuals working there that are focused on making sure their economy functions properly. So they'll be a great place to get this data out of. So Singapore is basically our forward-looking idea, and they've already said, well, it's a global pandemic, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go. I mean, in a very eloquent, not how I would say it way. It's definitely not how they said it. Have you heard anything about mutations, worse, less severe? We have not seen any mutations in the virus yet. That could take some time. Hey, Tio, could this be biological war? Even if it is, it's unimportant at this point. I think the main thing to do is stay proactively focused on the small things that you can do to increase your immuno reactions, right? Sleeping for 8 hours, 9 hours every night is super important for your T cell production. We know for a fact that often the people that live over 100 years in all the blue zones get at least 30 minutes of sunlight every day, right? So I think a big part of this is understanding what is a cooperative, healthy state of being. Live that and you should be fine. That's what we're seeing. Again, if the mortality rates increase because of things like cytokine storms, then this could be much more dramatic than we thought. But for now, let's leave it at not super dramatic, and it's a 2 to 3% rate, and Singapore will give us the data as we go forward. Again, another question, great live stream. Get a tinfoil feeling like they finally reported the numbers from Uring. I actually think these numbers are low. I believe these numbers are low, but that's just, again, my own personal sentiment. What we do have right now is what's following a quadratic growth curve, and that appears to me that they're lying. I think we have mathematical proof that they're lying to us about the numbers. Again, here we are at February 12th. This is where our statistical data said it would have put us into a 99th degree of certainty that it's a near perfect quadratic equation at 65,621, or 59. On the 11th, 59,168. So we're sitting right between that statistical perfection of a quadratic math equation, which means that we know nature doesn't follow perfection in math like that. We would see, especially with these draconian measures that China is taking, we're being lied to. The rate at which that lying really comes to light, we have no idea yet. So we're gonna have to wait. Oh, cool! Look at the logarithmic growth. Hats off to John Hopkins. Hats off to the Chinese people for the crazy measures they've been taking to try to contain this outbreak. I think it is commendable of them. It doesn't seem like it works, though. We may have to just let go and realize the futility in trying to fight off a global pandemic, and just hope that everyone is in a health and safe manner. So be sure to make sure you're getting enough sleep. You're healthy. You're not super stressed out. You're getting your proper vitamins from going out in the sun. All the things that you can't normally create in your body, from vitamin C through all the B's and 12 K vitamin C complexes, etc. These are all things your body can't produce or manufacture naturally. Supplementing is a great way to do it. Again, being ahead and proactive, I think, is going to be healthy. On Monday, depending on what happens here, I'm going to go to the store and I'm going to stock up on a bunch of things that I might need for a few months, in terms of, because there's nothing wrong with that. Being ahead of the curve, like, oh no, I've got 6 months of fucking first aid, broad spectrum antibiotics. It's like, who cares? You know how many times you could die from random shit that you just would go to the doctor for and forget about it? A lot more than you would imagine. So having these things, they last for 5 or 6 years at a time. It's basically like, okay, it's time to restock my first aid kit and make a proactive advantage of realizing this is how you would have to do it. And in almost any occasion that the just-in-time system doesn't work. Anyways, I'm going to leave it at that. It was quite a long rant today. I really appreciate all your guys' support. Again, the process here I wanted to go through of creating videos that were not live, that were live, but not pre-written. You know, a lot of people are really good at pre-writing stuff. They come up with all their notes, and I don't like to do that. I just like to freestyle. There's a lot that's going on. Freestyling allows me to learn and teach better. Instead of writing it all down, I'm not using like a cheat sheet. I'm just riffing on what I've learned. So hopefully it was helpful for you guys. Hopefully you all found it valuable. Again, remember to give us those thumbs up if you like this. Be proactive in these ones, I think, at least at the very least in the education about what these things are, because it makes a world of difference, and you feel better for it at the end, having learned something, and B, knowing that you can be better prepared for almost anything that comes your way in terms of living a healthier, more rich life. Anyways, this is Tio with the Arcane Bear. I am signing off for the rest of the day. I wonder what happened. What happened here? Did the stream break out? I think the stream broke out. Anyways, yeah, okay, we're back. I apologize for that. I hope you guys have a great day. Some cool, catchy tagline that I can't think of right now. And we'll see you guys on the other side.